Hi, I'm Nate Seberg, and this is One Day Ahead. Welcome to the Teaching Romeo and Juliet video series. In this video, we are walking through the comprehensive Romeo and Juliet teaching unit available for download right now at onedayahead.com. So for Romeo and Juliet, we have a student-facing summary and analysis series, an educator-facing teaching advice series, and this 124 pages of top-notch teaching materials that support your practice, their education, and syncs up to both series. I know, it's a lot. So here we are going to walk through that unit, and let's start with how it is organized. When you download this from onedayahead.com, it's going to come to you as PDFs and as Word documents. Pick a track, they're both the same. The files are organized into stuff to do before reading, during reading, and after reading, but that is the only organizational structure here. Think of this as a grab bag of resources, not a step-by-step guide to blindly follow. And I'm also giving you way more than you need on purpose. I want you to have options that make sense for your situation. There is not a right way to do this. That said, I am going to put this on the screen when I'm talking about the resources that I personally use when I teach this in my classroom. So let's walk through this in order of the PDF, starting with the read, watch, skip chart. This unit is predicated on having access to the Baz Luhrmann, Leo Danes 1996 version of the film. And this chart tells you when to jump between reading the text, watching the film, and what you should full on skip because it ain't worth your time. Side note, I've made a whole video on when and why I make those transitions if you want details. Now let's look at the unit materials you can use before your students crack the book. The first is this classroom scavenger hunt thing. Find someone who, followed by a theme from the book. Fine. Next, we have slides that I use every time called Old English. This is a bait and switch activity where I get them to complain that Shakespeare is Old English, then I show them and make them read actual Old English. We do the same thing for Middle English, then we show them the real text and break the myth that this is language that is inaccessible. The next 6 pages are slides from another PowerPoint. This is more of a reflection discussion way of getting going if that's your thing. The next 20 pages are called the Shakespeare Jigsaw. These are excellent readings that I jigsaw out to hit those basic background questions that students always have. Who was Shakespeare? What's the globe? What was London like? Etc. Those readings are accompanied by comprehension questions, if that's your thing, followed by instructions to turn their part of the jigsaw into an 8-minute poster, which they use when presenting their part of the puzzle. Finally, the last thing I put in the before reading category is something we start before we read, but I don't actually have due until after they've really encountered the text. It's called Finding Your Relevance. This is a major writing piece asking students to identify their personal reason to care about any of this stuff, like why study this? Or it asks them to defend why they don't find any value in this experience at all if that's how they're gonna approach it. There are instructions and a rubric. Now let's move on to the materials you can use as you walk through the play and movie. We start with a document that helps them track the characters as they go along called Who's Who in Verona. Then it's on to the prologue, our first encounter with the actual text. Here, students work together to directly translate those 14 lines. After that, we have slides teaching iambic pentameter with an excellent TED video that goes along with that. I don't do much with this other than to point out and essentially say, like, isn't this cool? I used to have them try to write their own pieces in iambic pentameter, and believe me when I say it was a mess. At this point, we have started reading in earnest, and somewhere early in Act 1, I have them select their house. They can choose Capulet or Montague. They pick a sigil, a house color, they make a bookmark, and generally pledge to ride or die for their newly adopted family. Once we get into Act 1, Scene 5, we make masks for the masquerade party. I don't let them go nuts with this, maybe 15 minutes, and we use paper plates and whatever else we got in order to go to this party incognito as a class. This sounds campy, it is campy, but they love it. Also in Act 1, Scene 5, we are going to spend some time on Romeo and Juliet's first conversation. Their first words combine like a zipper to create a perfect Shakespearean love sonnet they build together from their very first contact. I give you a reading about sonnets and I leave it to the kids to put together that Shakespeare embedded this little nugget into the play. Sometimes I have to guide students there, but most times, more times than not, somebody figures it out. Act 1 of Love and Marriage is another writing assignment on the themes of Act 1, and now we are on to Act 2. Act 2, Scene 2 is the balcony scene, and I have 2 things here. The first is instructions to pair off readers. Put Juliet's on the table, Romeo's underneath the table. The second is called The Price is Right. I developed this one to get over the debilitating awkwardness of this scene in the movie where Romeo and Juliet just make out for an unreal amount of time in a pool. We have kids place bets on how long they will make out. We time it like a science experiment, and you give out a prize to the closest without going over. Now, at the end of Act 2, you are going to throw a wedding. I burn a whole class period on this thing. You have instructions for how to orchestrate it. You have the speech and the vows from the Friar Lawrence, wedding invitations, and a Blake marriage certificate. Lots of stuff there. Act 3 opens with Romeo and Tybalt's fight. Tybalt insults Romeo, but it's pretty weak, so we spend some time formulating our own Shakespearean insults built from real language he uses in his plays. After hurling insults at each other for a while, we do a gallery walk trying to translate exquisite insults Shakespeare used in his other plays. You get those posters along with an answer key. In Act 4, we have another writing product called Juliet's Decision. This asks students to break down her monologue as she considers the possible implications of taking the sleeping potion. This is text analysis. We're taking a position, was this stupid, and supporting it with textual evidence. You have one document that is just the instructions and another that is instructions with a paint-by-number writing support outline. The next 9 pages are all acting resources. This play was never meant to be read by kids in a classroom, so I introduced the acting component right about Act 4 when things are getting a little stale. There are 2 tracks here. One is more light and fun, like, hey, let's try this. The other is more focused, more academic. There's more writing and character analysis. This document gives you the portions of the play students can choose, along with how hard the language is in this section and how many characters are involved. After the acting, the final thing in the during reading section is a series of are you tracking comprehension questions for every scene of this play. I don't personally use these, but I can see why you might. And now let's look at after reading, where you'll find a range of ways to wrap this thing up. My favorite by far is called character autopsies. Students work in groups to dissect a character who has died, attaching character traits supported by quotes that they attach to various parts of their bodies. Then they declare a cause of death. This is something I start with around Act 3, and we work on them intermittently throughout the unit. When the autopsies are complete, we hold a full-on funeral for those who have died. Kids dress in black, we play somber music, and one member from each group gives a eulogy, etc. If that's too dark or ungradable, consider a trial for Friar Lawrence. Students select the prosecution or the defense and make the case regarding his culpability in the lover's death. If you want something that is more of an in-class right, then Fate and Fortune is for you. We also have a student choice mini project with a bunch of options, questions if you want to hold a Socratic seminar, and a full-blown old-school test along with an answer key. Again, choose your own adventure. And finally, I have a bunch of stuff that didn't really belong anywhere. Other stuff includes a complete character list to keep kids tracking, a glossary of weird Shakespeare words that trip people up, a chart-based outline of every act and scene, and finally, a list of all the reading parts that you need to get covered if you are running this as an in-class read-aloud like I do. So that's 124 pages. Like I said, it's a lot. Bottom line, there is a lot to choose from here. But in closing, I would say this. Generally speaking, make this fun. This unit, this book, it's meant to be an experience that is enjoyed rather than a protracted test to be passed. If kids walk away more empathetic than when they started, if they care about someone other than themselves for long enough to learn something about human nature, if they leave thinking, wow, that didn't suck, well then friends, I contend that that is worth a few less grades in the grade book. And that's our Romeo and Juliet teaching unit, available right now at onedayahead.com, along with all my other stuff on Romeo and Juliet and a whole bunch of other books too. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.